Have you ever dreamed of living inside of Disneyland? I'm talking about actually living inside the park. Well, today's story isn't just about the only couple who ever did exactly that. How living in Disneyland was just 1/3 of their unbelievable journey. Brickey here, exploring one of the wildest stories in Disneyland's history, full of twists, legacy, and at least one big surprise I'm willing to bet you've never heard before. And just a real quick heads up, this story is so off the beaten path because it's so rare, it all happens backstage. There's very, very little footage or photography about what we're talking about today from this point in time. I did my normal deep dive, tried to find everything that I could, but I'm just gonna tell you up front, what you see won't always match what I'm talking about. It would just be impossible to build it like I normally do. And I also want to let you know, I did not film the Pope house. Juice wasn't worth the squeeze. It's backstage. I don't ever want to get in trouble with Disney, but if Disney ever wants to invite me to film the Pope house, I'll gladly accept. So I appreciate your patience, but I promise you, this is a Disney story like no other. Why don't you go ahead and subscribe to the channel right now so we can keep going on these crazy adventures together. They lived right here for 16 years. And they were the only people to ever call Disneyland home. Not just in spirit, but in reality. The Popes lived in a small 1,300 square foot house tucked behind Frontierland on an 11-acre site that used to be called the Disneyland Pony Farm. If you're standing in front of the Millennium Falcon, you're standing right where their yard was. And if you get on the ride, you're going into the Pony Farm, which was once their backyard. And this wasn't like an RV park backstage. This was a real home with a kitchen, living room, and drinking early morning coffee out of your own pot, just a few steps away from Disneyland's opening gates. The Popes moved into their house just 3 days before Disneyland opened up in 1955. And from that moment on, they were there every single day. Not just caring for the animals that brought Frontierland to life, but helping shape the heart of Disneyland's earliest identity. Horses, donkeys, Shetland ponies, and even circus animals once passed through the Pope's farm, right here. And when Walt Disney introduced stagecoaches and pack mules, it was the Popes who trained and cared for them. When Nature's Wonderland replaced the stagecoach trail, Owen and Dollie adjusted again, helping Disneyland evolve while still maintaining the Disney magic. And in 1966, Owen even helped launch a new program for the mule train attraction. He began hiring women to handle the mules, saying it made the guests feel more confident that the animals were calm, friendly, and well-behaved. And it worked. The pack mules became more popular than ever. And kind of my favorite part of this is for Owen and Dollie, the pony farm wasn't just their job, it was their passion. It was their paradise. In a place where their love of animals, the Wild West, and Walt's dream all came together. But this is the part of the Pope story that nobody talks about, because Disneyland was just one of 3 legendary Disney locations the Popes would call home. And the first one wasn't even located in Anaheim. So long before Disneyland, Owen and Dollie Pope were already living the cowboy life, touring the country with their ponies, their wagons, and handcrafted gear. And in 1950, their journey brought them to Los Angeles. This would change their life forever. Their journey would bring them to a show in LA where they showcased their skills at the Pan Pacific Auditorium, a place that looks just like the entryway to Disney California Adventure and Disney Hollywood Studios. It was here in 1951 that Walt Disney attended one of their exhibitions. Drawn by the authenticity of their performance and the craftsmanship of their equipment, Walt approached the Popes after the show. He was very interested in the harnesses and wagons, each piece meticulously crafted by Owen Pope himself. Dressed in his signature Western attire, Owen made an impression. Walt ever the visionary saw more than just a skilled horseman. He saw a kindred spirit. The 3 sat together, watching the ponies and discussing Walt's long-held dream of creating a family-friendly amusement park. As they talked, Walt sketched out ideas on a napkin, sharing his vision with the Popes. Later, Owen said you could tell that Walt had a real love for animals. You could sense that even before you got to know him. And Walt Disney recognized in Owen and Dollie the same qualities he valued himself: dedication, craftsmanship, and that pioneering spirit. But it seems, friends, their meeting was more than a chance encounter. It was the start of a collaboration that would help bring Walt's most ambitious dreams to life. Just when the Popes thought it was all over, Walt made them an offer. He wanted them to train horses for his new theme park. But not the theme park you're thinking of, not Disneyland. No, Walt's first plan was something much smaller, much stranger, a little project called Mickey Mouse Park that Walt wanted to build right in the middle of the Burbank studio lot. And the Popes would meet Walt Disney, their lives would change, they would live in 3 exotic locations, and maybe the best part of all, they would never pay rent ever again. So no, the Popes didn't move straight to Disneyland first, because before the castle, before Main Street, before a single churro cart was ever imagined, the Popes lived somewhere else. Somewhere maybe even more legendary. Before the Popes would call Disneyland home, they lived at the Disney Studio lot in Burbank, making that 2 insane places they called home. Owen and Dollie Pope were the only folks to ever live inside the gates of Walt Disney Studios. It started with their trailer parked on the back lot just after Thanksgiving in 1951. Walt was still calling his theme park project Mickey Mouse Park, and Walt needed someone he could trust to build his equestrian center. Someone who didn't just know horses, but someone who knew how to build something from nothing. This someone was Owen Pope. Walt gave him lumber from the studio, and Owen built 10 stalls by hand. And then, because you couldn't exactly buy miniature horse harnesses at the hardware store, he started making those from scratch too. Surreys, stagecoaches, wagons, every piece of horse gear was handmade in the shadow of the animation buildings. And for 3.5 years, they lived on the studio lot. And the studio lot wasn't just their home, it was their workshop, their stable, their personal audience with Walt Disney, who stopped by almost every day. Imagine for a second you wake up, step out your trailer, and there's Walt Disney, all while movies and Disneyland are being built in every building all around you. But as Walt's theme park plans got bigger, so did the problems. Owen had already acquired and outfitted a group of Shetland ponies, but as Walt's vision grew beyond Mickey Mouse Park and became Disneyland, Owen had to start over, because the original horses were just too small for the new 5/8 scale that Disneyland would be built in. He had to find bigger ponies, but not too big, and rethink his entire operation. But for all his troubles, here's the best part. The Popes never paid rent. Walt would cover everything. He paid them out of his own pocket, technically making Owen and Dollie Pope Walt's very first Disneyland employees, before the thought of Disneyland ever existed. And so eventually, the next place Walt would send them would finally become their dream home, right inside Walt's original Magic Kingdom. Before Disneyland's gates ever opened, there was Owen Pope, a man whose hands would shape the very foundation of Disney's frontier dreams. Born in Josephine, Texas in 1910, Owen was a product of the American West. During World War II, he honed his skills as a welder, a trade that would later provide invaluable. But it was his inventive spirit that set him apart. And in 1944, recognizing the need for a more efficient way to transport horses, Owen designed a new kind of horse trailer with a unique, get this, rocking horse suspension. And to promote his invention, he and his wife Dollie took to the road with a team of Shetland ponies, capturing audiences all across the country. And the performances quickly weren't just about showcasing Owen's trailer. They were a testament to Owen's ability to blend functionality with showmanship. The Pope's miniature team of horses became a sensation, leading to Owen to sell his trailer business and in 1949 dedicate himself entirely to his pony show. Their journey eventually brought them to Los Angeles, where fate stepped in. Owen's role extended beyond animal care. He was a master craftsman, building stagecoaches, Conestoga wagons, and other vehicles, integral to Frontierland's immersive experience. His attention to detail was a commitment to authenticity, helping bring Walt's vision to life. But Owen's contributions weren't limited to behind-the-scenes work. He also sometimes would step out onto the stage, recreating his signature rodeo act at Disneyland. One memorable performance featured a Cinderella pumpkin coach drawn by his miniature horses, a nod to the very act that caught Walt's attention in the first place. But he was also a part of the Mickey Mouse Circus, doing the exact same act that had led Walt to him, making everything a full circle trip. It was Owen that would train the horses for Disneyland, thinking of creative ways to make sure these horses were stage ready, exposing them to all the different types of environments that Disneyland would bring, placing ponies in a farm in the middle of nowhere with loud music playing all around them. Must have been a sight to see. A welder, inventor, craftsman, trainer, performer embodied the pioneering spirit that Walt Disney cherished. Their shared belief and power of hard work and imagination forged a bond that would shape the Disney park's legacy. And while Owen's contributions to Disneyland were monumental, his journey with Disney was far from over. The next chapter of the story would take him across the country, where he'd once again lay the groundwork for future Disney magic. Imagine you wake up and just outside your kitchen window lies Disneyland. No cast members, no guests, just the quiet hum of sprinklers on Main Street. For Owen and Dollie Pope, this wasn't a fantasy, this was their life. Their home was a modest farmhouse, originally built in the 1920s, and the Pope house was part of the original property. The home's original location was on Harbor Boulevard when it was part of a walnut farm. And somehow, through all the changes, this little farmhouse survived. But here's a twist. Their house actually moved around the park multiple times, 4 times to be exact. The first time, it sat what's now the north edge of the property, tucked just outside the gates on Winston Road. Then in 1955, it was moved to a 10-acre plot of land, which was then behind Fantasyland. This is where the pony farm was established, a quiet farmhouse on the back edge of Disneyland, hidden just beyond the berm. But you could see it if you sneaked a peek from the Disney Skyway. But friends, as we all know, Disneyland never stops changing. By the 1980s, the Pope House had shifted again, this time being behind Big Thunder Ranch. Still surviving, still standing, but had a whole different neighbor, because the plot of Disneyland had changed, not the house. For a brief time, the home became a credit union annex, the Pony Farm's admin office. It was even a media production space, nicknamed Pony Farm Productions. Somehow, this little house kept adapting as Disneyland did. And in the 1990s, when Disneyland was planning the Indiana Jones expansion, the Pope House almost met its end. But it was saved again, and in 2016, when construction began on Galaxy's Edge, the oldest structure at Disneyland was quietly moved to a parking lot off of Ball Road. Still standing, still holding the spirit of the Popes and the early days of Walt's dream. It's one of those Disneyland artifacts that doesn't feel like a monument, it feels like a memory. A creaky little house that outlived the Wild West it once supported. And as of today, 2025, the Pope House maybe is the last standing old farmhouse from the early days of German settlers here in Anaheim. But as magical as it was, it wouldn't last forever, because Disney would ask the Popes to leave Disneyland. And where were they sent next? The story gets even crazier, because this is where things get even more unbelievable. After 16 years of living within the magic of Disneyland, the Popes were asked to pack it all up and move one last time. But friends, this wasn't a farewell, it was a new beginning. The Pope's final mission? To help bring Walt Disney's next grand vision to life, the Florida Project. So in January of 1971, the Popes relocated to Florida, becoming the only people that lived full-time at Walt Disney Studios, here at Disneyland, and now at Walt Disney World. This is a trifecta that remains unmatched in Disney's wild history. And their new home was the Tri-Circle D Ranch at Fort Wilderness. And just like at Disneyland, Owen and Dollie rolled up their sleeves, got to work, building another ranch from the ground up. Owen, the ever craftsman, had already begun making the first harnesses for Walt Disney World's horses while still here at Disneyland. And Owen's dedication didn't go unnoticed. To this day, there's a window on Main Street in the Magic Kingdom that honors him. Owen Pope, harness maker, saddles, a specialty. But now that we followed the Popes through 3 Disney parks across 2 coasts, it's fair to ask a couple of questions. What was it actually like to live inside of the Disney parks? And what did Dollie really think about packing up her life more than once and following her husband into the oddest living arrangements possibly imaginable? I mean, you have to wonder, did they love it? Did they ever question it? Did they ever feel trapped? Were they sick of it? And most importantly, what happens when the job you love most suddenly turns on you? Because taking care of animals, especially in a place like Disneyland, means dealing with the happiest guest on earth, but also facing the darkest parts of nature when no one's looking. And for the Popes, those days were very real and sometimes very hard to talk about. If Owen Pope was the cowboy, then Dollie was the compass. The couple met in Fort Worth, Texas, when Dollie was 16, married by 21. And from that day forward, it was always Owen and Dollie. No kids, just each other. And a barn full of animals they love like their children. And Dollie, she wasn't along just for the ride. She ran the office, kept the books, and drove Owen across the country to horse auctions. She handled the business, logistics, and even the little details that made all of Owen's big dreams quite possible. She loved the animals. She once quoted a ASPCA official who told her, "If there's anything to this reincarnation, I want to come back as a Walt Disney horse." That was Dollie's badge of honor. When asked if the couple had ever been on a honeymoon, Dollie said, "No, we couldn't afford one. But we have been on a honeymoon all of our married life," with a smile that said way more than the words ever could have. The Popes for 20 years would eat out 2 meals a day. It wasn't that they didn't enjoy cooking or didn't have a kitchen. It's because this was their only escape from the park. Disneyland wasn't just where they lived, it was a 24-hour job. There were no shifts, no time off. There was just the love and the horses and a lot of long days and longer nights. And maybe, just maybe, they're the only couple on earth who knew what it felt like to take a midnight ride through an empty Disneyland on horseback. Just the 2 of them and the sound of the hooves echoing down Main Street, USA. I really, really hope that they did that at least once. They had to have, right? But even in paradise, not everything lasts forever. Because animals offer endless love, but they can also break your heart. And for the Popes, heartbreak wasn't just possible, it was inevitable. The animals at Disneyland were treated like royalty. Each morning they were gently woken up, given a bath, maybe a haircut if needed, and always a long rub down. They were fed scientifically balanced diet of grains and alfalfa, and then loaded onto a padded powder blue truck that took them from backstage to onstage. They worked short shifts, just 4.5 hours each day, with 2 full days off each week. Their shoes were made from custom-designed polyurethane to cushion their hooves from the pavement. Their carriages were made lightweight and smooth, designed by Owen himself to lessen the burden on the animals. They were trained like star performers. Balloons were released inside their stalls so they wouldn't easily spook. Band music played on speakers so the trumpets wouldn't startle them, and gunfire sounds were piped in during their training so they never flinch when they walked past the shooting gallery. They were obviously more than animals, they were cast members. And for Owen and Dollie, they were also family. But friends, no matter how much you love animals, one thing's guaranteed, they're always gonna break your heart. This next part might be rough for some of you. Feel free to click ahead if you can't hear about animals enduring any kind of pain, but it is an important part of what these folks had to endure with their job at Disneyland. One Christmas parade, the Cinderella coach was being pulled down Main Street by a dozen baby ponies. Somewhere near the Emporium, one of them got their leg caught in the trolley track. The horse had twisted its ankle badly. Panicked at Thrash, and the other 11 ponies bolted in chaos. With guests watching, security rushed in and tranquilized the injured animal right in the middle of the parade route. It's show business, so the show went on. But there it was, a sedated pony under the bright lights of Main Street, with Christmas music still playing in the air. And then there was the worst of it, because sadly, one morning, a horse pulling a streetcar in the middle of town square dropped dead instantly. Just like you or I, the horse suffered a heart attack. For Disney, there was no way to hide it, no gentle way to explain it. And logistically, you can't exactly carry a 2,000-pound draft horse off stage. The only option was a forklift. But a supervisor, knowing how the press would react, had a large tarp thrown over the animal. Guests would ask what happened, and the cast members would be honest. Horses have heart attacks, just like people do. But eventually, they rerouted the crowd, the forklift came out, and the moment passed. But the memory stayed with the people who lived it. Because caring for animals at Disneyland is about everything in between. The unpredictable, the heartbreaking, the quiet moments, and the moments that no one plans for. And the Popes, they were here for all of it. They gave everything to their animals, and the animals gave it right back until the day they couldn't. And that's the cost of the job. To be a permanent caretaker for animals takes an endless amount of love, but it also requires a lot of toughness, because it is not for the weak of heart. For Walt Disney, after the chaos, long days, and sometimes heartbreak, there was always the farm. Because for Walt Disney, the pony farm wasn't just a set piece for Frontierland, it was his quiet place. It was also his favorite place. Because tucked away behind the scenes, far from the crowds, the press, and the pressure, the pony farm was Walt's favorite personal retreat. He stabled his horses there, and I mean, technically they were all his horses. He'd ride around on the trail, sometimes even bringing his grandkids along for a lazy loop, riding on the mules and the ponies around Papaw's little farm in the backside of Disneyland. What an experience. It was a spot at Disneyland that felt untouched. No cameras, no meetings, just Walt and the animals, and hopefully a little peace of mind. And in that space, off limit to everyone except for the Wranglers, was a kind of peace that I'm sure Walt always dreamed of but couldn't always find inside of Disneyland. According to the folks that worked there, Walt liked that it was private, and he loved that Owen and Dollie Pope were the ones taking care of it. By this part in Owen and Dollie Pope's story, they didn't just work for Walt Disney, they were there because he believed in them. Owen knew that Walt had changed his life, gave him purpose, gave him a place and a chance to do what he loved every single day. And in return, Owen gave Walt something he rarely got: a space to simply be and to not have to be the Walt Disney. No show, no spectacle, just the sound of hooves and a breeze through the trees. And maybe if the day was slow enough, Walt could actually get out and do a little bit of riding himself. At least that was the dream. Even after Walt was gone, Owen Pope kept that dream alive. Because I'm sure once you've seen what's possible, when a man like Walt Disney believes in you, you never want to let that go. In 1985, Disneyland turned 30, and Owen Pope came back to see it one last time. He flew in from his retirement home in Florida. The man who once woke up every morning inside the park was now returning for the first time ever as a guest. And as he stood in the middle of Disneyland, surrounded by balloons, music, and 30 years worth of magic, he said quietly, "I wish Walt was here right now." And if you think about it, it must have been surreal. Owen had been there 3 days before the park opened. That's when he moved in. He saw the park take shape, from pony trails to parades, from the first visitors to the 1 millionth. And now he was standing in a version of Disneyland that Walt would never get to see. A bigger park, a global icon, a living dream that had outlived its dreamer. And he said Walt wouldn't be surprised by any of this. He envisioned it all, just like he envisioned the Florida park before he passed away. Because that's what hit him the hardest, that Walt Disney never got to see Disney World open. But Owen Pope did. Walt shared the dream, but Owen lived long enough to see it come true. Walt was about as nice of a man there ever was, Owen said. He loved horses, he was very considerate. We always called the Disney way courtesy, good workmanship, and neatness. And you bet he'd like to be here today. Owen passed away in 2000. Dollie would follow 3 years later. And probably for most folks, that's where this wild story ends. But here's the thing, it's not the whole story. So far, you've heard the story of the only people to ever live at Disneyland. But that story isn't entirely true, because there were two more. The first was a young man named J.R. Minnick. Though to the Popes, he was just simply Bob. Bob Minnick was their nephew. He grew up in Fort Worth, Texas, just like his aunt and uncle. He had a passion for art design from an early age. And after high school, he moved to California to live with his aunt and uncle, and he got to live on the only house on Disneyland property. But Bob's interaction with the theme park industry was way more than just a couple summers spent at Disneyland. He worked alongside the Popes during the park's earliest years, helping care for the 200 animals. And for Bob, this time didn't just shape his memories, it shaped his future. You see, after working at Disneyland, Bob Minnick went on to work and manage several theme parks. Then he did something even bigger. He founded Minnick Associates, a world-renowned entertainment design and architectural firm. He specialized in theme park layout, guest experience, and crowd flow. And I wonder where he learned all of that. Because at an early age, he'd literally lived in the prototype for all of it. He designed skill game operations at the original Six Flags over Texas, created guest circulation strategies used across the globe, and it all started in a modest little house just behind Frontierland. But Bob Minnick wasn't the only surprising resident. There was one more. He happens to be my favorite Disney character of all time. Because at one point, the Popes took in a stray dog. This mutt was also the live action reference model for Tramp in Lady and the Tramp. You heard me right. For the duration of his life, Tramp lived here at Disneyland. And Tramp is my avatar on all things Disneyland because he looked just like my first dog I ever had. R.I.P. Baxter. I think about you every day, brother. And that was my favorite thing I found when I uncovered this whole amazing story. It literally warmed my heart. And it's really a reminder of why I do this channel. Because it's funny to think about all the things that get remembered. The parades, the castles, the souvenirs. But behind it all, there were real people, like the Popes, like Bob, and like my friend, Tramp. Because this small cast of characters, they didn't just work at Disneyland, they lived it. And in doing so, they left behind something bigger than horses and harnesses. They left a legacy. Because no matter how much Disneyland changes, and it's always changing, someone quietly behind the curtain is brushing down a horse, cleaning a saddle, or dreaming up the next big idea. And I'm sure somewhere in all of that, you can still feel Owen and Dollie Pope. Friends, thank you so much for showing up and hanging out with me on what I believe is one of the greatest Disneyland stories I ever got to tell you. But if you're looking for something else to watch, check out this video on my second channel, Brickey Vlogs, where I kind of remind us all, sometimes when things don't go the way that we plan, they work out even better than what we could have dreamed. Thank you so much for showing up, and thank you even more to my magic brick key holders for making today's video possible. I'll see you next week.